Of this off, Walter is diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer, which comes with medical fees that are more than enough to completely bankrupt him and his family. And this starts to bring in one of the most important parts of this whole series. Whilst it's subtle, this series makes this key point in showing the absurdity of how similar Big Pharma is to the illegal drug trade. In America, drugs for terminal illness and rare diseases can cost over $3 million, with these vital medicines being inflated purely for the gain of a few pharmaceutical titans. And these price markups are becoming deadly. And what's even scarier is that the FDA, who regulates Big Pharma, is now becoming regulated by Big Pharma. You see, the Food and Drug Administration used to be funded by the government, but today the FDA is funded by the institutions and companies it's supposed to regulate. In fact, 45% of the FDA is solely funded by fees companies pay when applying for medical approval. And this has in turn led to the FDA to almost double the amount of accepted applications. And in diseases where there aren't many medical options for patients, 89% of these applications were approved first time round by the FDA, which of course allows Big Pharma to have an extremely tight grip over American society, where the most influential businesses in America profit from the suffering of its customers, to the point where prices are so jacked up that a highly educated teacher with 2 jobs faces the very real prospect of going bankrupt, a prospect of leaving nothing to his name and family just to pay the exorbitant bonuses of Big Pharma CEOs. It's exactly for this reason that Walt is put into a nightmarish conundrum.
Fuck you, Bogdan, and your eyebrows!
In business, money is equated to value. The wealth of an individual is correlated with the amount of value they provide to society. However, when it comes to drugs that save human life, does this same standard hold true? This is exactly the question Breaking Bad works to answer. And it's also why Breaking Bad's first season couldn't have been produced at a better time. Breaking Bad was first produced in 2008, the exact same year as the financial crash, where the banks got bailed out and the bubble was inflated exponentially. And the people paying the price for this was the average American worker, via quantitative easing, money printing, and inflation, while at the same time the public's wages stagnated. Which is why Walter White represents the average middle-aged man in this time. Walter is repressed, overworked, underpaid, can't afford a doctor, can't afford a family, all while the people at the top are indifferent.
Hey.
Well,
the
thing is that he could have been at the top. He just chose not to, because he's a fucking soy cuck.
Unable to afford a standard of living that provides him with basic dignity, embroiled in debt, no savings, no money, living an atomized, transient, lonely life with just a few months to live.
He comes back though.
This is all a recipe for radical change, because nothing matters anymore. His family doesn't care about him.
Big Pharma are the same. They are just the most successful drug dealers.
Interesting.
His peers look down on him and death is imminent. At this point, there's nothing left for Walter to lose. The story of Walter White is a story of Walter's transition into Breaking Bad.
Goddamn right.
In fact, Walter White represents a concept I talk about often, the idea of the young shadow self. At the start of the show, we see Walter's typical persona. Walter's just your normal, mild-mannered guy. But the reason he's so normal is because he hasn't been in abnormal circumstances. But now with Walt suddenly being faced with an overwhelming set of circumstances, Walter decides to take on some temporary abnormal action. And so Walter begins his journey into the world of meth and brutality. And all of this backstory is essential to understanding the broader meaning of Breaking Bad, because the transformation of Walter White throughout Breaking Bad is a warning that every member in society can become evil in the right circumstances. You watching this right now could very well become a tyrant. You could easily become the monster you hate. And this has been documented in the real world so many times. One of the most famous examples of this was the book called Ordinary Man. Ordinary Man's this book about German policemen in World War II. These police were sent into Poland in the war, rounding up stadiums of people and shipping them off on trains, where these policemen would commit the worst atrocities imaginable. It was so bad that these policemen would become physically ill by what they had to do. And yet the most striking part of all of this is that they had the choice to not do it. They didn't have to do any of this, and yet they consciously chose to. The book highlights the very real way you can end up in this evil place just one step at a time. It shows how these awful events like those in World War II can't just be understood as historical fact, because instead, we need to understand the casual pathways towards this transformation, because all these evil atrocities happen at one step at a time. Which is why in the case of Breaking Bad, we need to understand Walt's full backstory to understand the true reality of how any one of us could become a ruthless drug lord given the right circumstances.
Okay, whoa!
Walter first tiptoes into the drug trade. His DEA brother-in-law, Hank, invites him on a drug bust. There, he sees his former student Jesse Pinkman running away from the scene.
Pinkman?
Having known Jesse and needing a quick, easy way of making money, Walt offers to cook with him. The partnership being that Walt does the cooking and Jesse does the selling, using each other's strengths to make a quick buck.
You,
You wanna cook crystal meth?
After some convincing, the two begin working on their first batch. This is Walt's first step into Breaking Bad. Walter is outwardly rejecting any handouts from his former business partners, all to earn a big amount of cash and respect before he dies. But in this time, Walt is incredibly naive to the criminal world and sees criminals as rational humans he can talk to with respect. But this doesn't last for very long. After Jesse Pinkman sells the deal to Crazy 8, Crazy 8 lures them out and threatens to kill Walt and Jesse and steal their formula. To survive this nightmare scenario, Walt creates a poisonous gas to escape, although somehow Crazy 8 narrowly survives the gas, so now Walt is faced with his first major moral conundrum. What possible choice do you have at this point when you have a drug dealer who wants to kill you and will kill you? There's only one option, so Jesse and Walt flip a coin, and sure enough, Walt is now forced into killing Crazy 8. As you'd expect, this moment taints Walter's soul, and the transition into the shadow self is underway, because not only is Walt cooking drugs and being involved with the death of Crazy 8, but Walt is constantly absent, he's lying to his family, he's hiding his cancer, his relationship with Jesse and his whereabouts. All of these lies and actions are eroding his moral filter, and this brings about exactly what he's trying to avoid. His lies are breaking apart his family, and with the trauma of Crazy 8's death, this whole situation is becoming too overwhelming. So Walt decides that for now, it's time to stop this mad fantasy. Maybe he should just accept his fate as a meek, mild-mannered, docile man. So Walt ignores Jesse's suggestion to keep cooking and goes back to his regular life. But this is a hit to his ego, his pride. He's back to the milquetoast life he was so desperate to escape, back to having no control, back to being just another consumer. With these feelings and the money starting to come in from the last cook, Walter can't help but quickly dip his toes back into the underworld. So Walt and Jesse get back to cooking after Jesse finds a new distributor, a psychotic and evil distributor known as Tuco. After Jesse goes up to him to sell their batch, Tuco beats up Jesse and steals his batch without paying any money for it. So Walt makes the conscious decision to go back and finish the business deal, telling Tuco he wants the money in compensation for what he did to Jesse. After Tuco laughs and threatens him, Walt blows up his entire building. This is the moment we get to see a milquetoast, mild-mannered man merging into his shadow self, releasing all this pent-up rage, aggression and repression into finally becoming someone he respects. With death ticking in the background and this unfulfilled life awaiting him, Walt's able to bring his shadow self into reality through the persona known as Heisenberg. This shadow self is manifested through all of Walt's life.
Guys, no joke, guys. I had unironical chills in this scene.
In the background and this unfulfilled life awaiting.
I was lucky enough that it was on Netflix at the time, okay, and I could continue watching after this part. I was actually pogging IRL. Actual pog.
Walt's able to bring his shadow self into reality through the persona known as Heisenberg. This shadow self is manifested through all of Walt's life. All the sacrifices Walt made for other people to like him. All the humiliation, all the fake smiles, all the facades. All of this is bubbling away at Walt, having his business ideas taken away from him, having other people take credit for his genius. With no.
And then you know what he built that is very important? Intrinsic value. Intrinsic value that comes from within, not from outer.
Nothing ever going his way. For most of Walter White's life, he has been a pushover. And Walt, like many of us, thinks that being a pushover is a good thing, because Walter White confuses harmlessness with morality. But just because you can't do damage doesn't mean you're moral, which is exactly—
Always remember, chat, guys, you can have all the pogs coming towards you, okay? But you're always gonna be missing one pog. Your own pog. If you're missing your own pog, all the other pogs that are coming in are worthless.
What we start to see in Breaking Bad, because the show highlights the very real way that harmless people, pushover mule-like people, are far from moral.
Angry because you're doing your best and you're trying to get along with everyone and nothing ever goes your way. Well, it's because you're a pushover. Just because you can't do any damage doesn't mean you're moral. It just means
Bro, this guy looks on
you don't
crack.
have the capability for mayhem. And that makes you a pushover. You can't say no to people, and you'll go along with the crowd. And then if the crowd
this
does
guy
something
looks
particularly
cracked
pathological,
the fuck up.
which it's liable to do, you won't be able to resist it.
And that's exactly what we see with Walt.
Bro, this guy looks like your fucking philosophy teacher at 6 in the morning who is fucking coked up on fucking 3 espressos and he's about to fucking have a seizure in the middle of his fucking lecture. He's about to lose his these guys' veins are fucking pumping so hard, he's about to explode live on stage, man.
Which it's liable to do. You won't be able to resist it.
And that's exactly what we see with Walt. He's always having to lie, he's manipulating those around him in mild ways. He's even hiding his disease to his family out of cowardice, with Walt doing all of this just to escape confrontation. But in the criminal underworld, Walt takes on the Elias Heisenberg, which allows him to—
I'm 26! My body is meant for that! I'm meant to be fucking cracked up, man! My man's pushing 80! He's
the man he
pushing
never was.
80!
His testosterone increases, his attitude changes because Walt is becoming a new man. A man with a mission, a man with respect. Walter White is morphing into a ruthless, assertive man, taking what he wants and saying what he wants. With this aggressiveness coming out to those around him and his students, it's a very stark contrast to the beginning of the show, because Walter White is finally breaking bad.
You're goddamn right.
But before we continue the story, I want to tell you about... Now back to the video. The first major sign of Walt's shadow self dripping into his personal life is seen with his encounter with Gretchen, where Walter releases his repressed anger at Gretchen. A sudden change to the friendly mild-mannered front he was so accustomed to putting up. His abrasive rejection of her playing a role in his life comes with him aggressively telling her to leave him alone.
Yeah, man.
Similarly, in another scene, Walter was brutal with his failing student, telling him a fail is a fail.
Can I be honest with you guys? Guys, this is a moment, and I think in the movie, well, I related a lot to the character. I think I related a lot to this, man. Is scumbag suckers, and you finally tell them how the fuck it is, man, and they freeze up. They freeze up. They don't know what's happening, man, because they're being told for one, dude, how it actually is, dude.
Similarly, in another scene, Walter is brutal with his
It
failing
feels so good
student,
to
telling
tell him
a
sometimes.
fail is a fail, telling the student that he doesn't care for the consequences of his own failures. And in the underworld, Walter is quick to capitalize on any opportunity, no matter the morals behind it, to maximize his profits. For example, when word of mouth spreads that Jesse was the one who killed the meth head who robbed Skinny Pete, Walter uses this opportunity to gain more power, reputation, and money
How's
for
that
his
ironic?
primary goal. And again, this is seen with Walt's willingness to kill Badger in prison after his lawyer's suggestion, highlighting the newfound ruthlessness that has saturated his psyche. Walter White's descent into the shadow self perfectly mirrors the descent of those discussed in Ordinary Man. In this book, the author makes a key point in showing how in every society across cultures, religions, and epochs, people always seek career advancement. In every society, the majority of people will act awfully. They will be evil. They will engage in disgusting behavior in the name of progress. The book concludes that about 85 to 90% of people will, when given a sufficient position of power, carry out any action, even if murderous, in order to fulfill the idea of improvement. In the book, this immoral action comes with shooting unarmed civilians to ensure the progress of the German nation. But this example isn't some anomaly. The Stanley Milgram experiments found that most people would commit and inflict physical pain on another human if they thought it brought security by following orders.
Wrong. Answer is neck. 300 volts.
I absolutely refuse to answer anymore. Get me out of here. You can't hold me here. Get me out. Get me out of here.
Continue. The next word is green.
Guys,
please. Green.
I feel
brass
like
hat.
because I feel like there's a lot of experiments and a lot of results of things that people have studied that they are being purposely not released so that people aren't too aware. Because I feel like some of this shit makes people too aware.
Pink apple.
The rare people who didn't commit these acts were those who had integrated their shadow and persona self to become a grounded human being. So if we use this knowledge, the idea of Walt shrugging off his moral framework starts to make a lot of sense. Now in this point in the series, Jesse is scarred by the death of the meth head who robbed Skinny Pete. And added on to the witnessing of this death is a growing reputation after word gets out that Jesse was involved in the murder. The combination of these two things brings a wave of pressure that Jesse can no longer handle. So after falling in love with an addict next door, Jesse eventually becomes numbed in a cloud of drugs. And yet at the same time, their lawyer Saul Goodman brings in a new distributor for their product. This time the distributor is the calm and collected man known as Gus Fring. However, the catch is that Gus only works with reliable partners, and after seeing Walt's partnership with the drug addict Jesse, Gus is understandably hesitant to work with him. Although after Walt convinces Gus, they come to a deal. So now Walt needs to get the product to Gus, because if he can deliver this product on time, Walter will have more money than he ever dreamed of making in the first place. However, Jesse is becoming less and less reliable, falling into a drug spiral with his addict girlfriend, with Jesse's girlfriend luring him away from the business and into a new life far away from home. She wants to escape with Jesse and threatens Walt's whole plan. So when it comes to the big deal with Gus, Walt is left to do the deal himself. When Walt arrives at Jesse's, he sees Jesse and Jane passed out on drugs, with Jane vomiting and suffocating in a drug-induced haze. And then added onto this, Walt's wife births their new child. This whole situation is the perfect conundrum that represents Walt's character. Does he care more about the new life of his family and the life of Jane, or is he more interested in business and money? The question is answered with Walt's absence of action in both of these events. Jane's death marks the end of Walt's mild-mannered milquetoast life, because by this point in Walt's descent, there is no longer any way out. There is no redemption. And that's why it's this moment that leads on to one of the most important parts of the series, because this next chapter shows Walt's full shadow side. And it's also this part of the series that conveys the broader...
Also though, he chose to not be on the grind, right? And it's almost like he saw himself somebody who's gonna stray away from the grind. and he wanted to put him onto the path that he learned from.
The message
Yeah.
of the between Big Pharma
Yeah.
and drug trade. After the deal between
Real.
Gus and Walt's
Real.
shadow self is
That's
stroked by
real.
Gus to get him to cook more. Gus strokes the shadow by
It's
recognizing
real.
Walt's
It's real.
untapped genius. He recognizes his potential and what he's capable of. It's this recognition that has been
what is
missing
it?
in
Let me
Walt's
joke,
life.
chat's
Walt
dumb.
craves validation for his work, and Gus gives him just that, offering Walter $3 million for 3 months of work. But the question is, who is Gus? What does the character behind Gus represent? Well, in my view, Gus's character represents the cold and hollow facade of the corporation, and in particular, the shadowy Big Pharma industry. While Gus is obviously not trading legal narcotics, the structure of his corporation has a very similar framework to Big Pharma, which is why Gus's corporate attitude to narcotics is kind of scarier than the thuggish dealers we see up until now. Professor David Pearson examined this connection between Gus Fring and neoliberalism, the sort of capitalism we've been subject to in recent years that has led to the most atomized, meaningless, nihilistic, empty era in history. And Gus represents this attitude where nothing is more important than maximum profits, where to achieve maximum profits you have to be as bland as possible, as fake as possible, and as ruthless as possible, where there is no emotion or identity, just pure greed. I mentioned at the start of this video about Big Pharma's influence over the FDA, and how the regulators of Big Pharma are in fact on the payroll of Big Pharma. Well, this all corresponds directly with Breaking Bad, where those who are supposed to regulate monopolized criminals like Gus are in fact on the payroll of Gus, with Gus and the DEA being closely allied with one another, just like Big Pharma is tied to FDA regulators.
Yeah, but they don't know though. One is being deliberate, and one is not though. It's not. I don't think it's a good parallel
Government
at all.
and media. This is because to operate such a
That
monstrous
is
empire
not
that
a good-
feeds on the misery of untold millions through chemical dependence, addiction, and exploitation, you have to have this plastic-friendly and empty front if you want to survive under the radar. It's exactly this framework that led to Walter becoming a drug lord in the first place. It's the model that threatened to bankrupt a regular high school teacher and his family for the sake of greed. Now on the surface, Gus is just a benevolent philanthropist. He's a model citizen providing jobs and security for hundreds of people. But the bottom line is Gus is only doing this because it's best for business, which is why the show always highlights this divide between his warm public persona and his cold inner mind. To convey this duality, we see the fake smiles that don't reach his eyes. It accompanies his consumer-friendly speak and PR campaigns, which is at odds with the cold profit-ridden agenda. It's the same dog-eat-dog attitude that has saturated our economy, manifesting the dot-com bubble, the 2008 financial crash, the opioid epidemic, and now our current economic stagnation and massive levels of inflation. Furthermore, Pearson points out that meth is just another drug that fuels the neoliberal fetish for productivity, because most performance enhancers are legal. Caffeine, energy drinks, steroids, Viagra, and prescribed Adderall, which is pretty much meth in itself. So in the end, what is the moral difference between Big Pharma and Gus's empire? There's hardly any difference between the two in terms of collateral damage done to society. Gus's first priority is always profit. Consumer and employee well-being is always last, which is why the ruthlessness and predatory actions we associate with crime isn't actually associated.
Oh my god, because Adderall is amphetamine and meth is a methamphetamine. It's gotta be the same thing. It's the same thing. No, it's not. Stop being such a fucking fake woke dog, Andy, dude. Shut up.
Associated with drugs, but more with the business behind it. Gus represents the danger of this neoliberal model of thinking.
You're dumb, you're dumb.
When Walt sees Gus's new lab, it seems like a success to Walt. The lab's pharmaceutical, it's industrial and secure. Because Gus treats meth like any other product or commodity, meth is just another investment.
Look at
This
the compounds.
corporate
I know the
veneer
compounds. I'm not
perfectly
fucking
hides away the
stupid.
destruction of the product to its consumers. It's almost as though Walt is back to running his old grey matter business. And over the series, Gus continues to play on Walter's deep-seated shadow side. He understands the character of Walter and his descent into the shadow. Gus wants Walter to continue his descension by luring him into becoming a
33
full-time cook.
months with
He
the
plays on
King's
Walt's shadow by using his
xQc
psychology
LTA
against
checks
him,
for the
telling Walter
strains
that a
of
man
the
provides for his family,
xQcl.
that a man does this even when he's not respected or loved.
He simply bears up, and he does it.
Proving to
Okay,
Walter that
okay.
he
You people have absolutely no knowledge of the fucking chemistry, okay, and how small changes can do the most drastic things when you consume it as a fucking human idiot, okay? Because something is in the same umbrella or in the same branch that oh, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You're fucking dumb, dude. You can use small amounts of fucking amphetamines for years on end with having little to no fucking physical repercussions compared to another thing like fucking the methamphetamine, which has immediate and instant neurotoxic effects after first use, let alone long use or prolonged use or abuse. Okay, you're fucking dumb. Just be quiet.
He is the great man he was destined to be, and that Walter can be the man to bring his family to new heights of prosperity. Gus strikes at Walter's shadow perfectly. It seems as though Walter is still motivated by his family and that his shadow side is only used as a survival mechanism. But deep down, Walter can't hide away from the fact that he's in too deep. He's
so fucking wrong. I mean, you're stupid. I know this shit probably better than most people in chat. 99%. Okay, I know how this shit works. Okay. The potential for harm is not even comparable in the wide variety of what amphetamines are, and comparing one to the other is a fucking brain dead. It's stupid and deliberately
Meth
wrong.
is literally a legit ADHD medication. Look up Dazoxin. It's farm-grade extra methamphetamine sold as ADHD medication in the US.
Okay, pharmaceutical grade dextro. That's fine. What the fuck are you talking about?
Nice helmet.
You have no idea what you're talking about. Just be quiet. Fuck.
He knows he can't escape his past actions. He knows he's losing his family, he's losing his moral grounding, and now he's losing his sense of self. So in an effort to end his pain, Walt attempts to end his life before things get out of hand. As by this point, Walt's life is spiraling
I'm so done. Okay, I'm not gonna argue, chat. Okay, about drugs and shit. You guys, you're being obtuse. Okay, you're dumb. I didn't get rolled. Guys, the smallest fucking difference, okay, in chemical compound can mean such a big difference, okay? I don't know why it's like I'm talking to idiots, okay? Fucking stoner head Andes. We know chat's dumb yet. Chat is being dumb today. Why, guys, is chat being like this? Why?
out of control. Walter explains this perfectly in the Fly episode, where he tells Jesse that he had the perfect time to die and become the hero for his family, and now he's just the villain of his family's story. Just like the ordinary men in Germany who would drink themselves to near death, who would vomit and commit suicide after committing so many atrocities. Because like any human being, the more extreme your shadow self, the more this internal pain catches up with you. And yet these men like Walter continued on with their actions anyway. We continue to see the shadow side later on in the series. For example, we clearly see this with Walt's different attitude when he murders the killers of Thomas. Whilst this killing does seem justified, considering these men shot a child, it's his brazen attitude to murder that cements his shadow self as his primary persona. This shows that all the reservations to murder that he had at the start of the show is now fully dissolved. It's the same reason his murder of the innocent cook Gail is done so without any hesitation.
Again!
However, the real change begins to happen around season 4 episode 9.
Another deja
After
vu!
all the lies, the fights,
Another
the
deja vu
manipulation of
again!
Jesse, after
How?
all the deaths, and now with his life threatened by Gus, Walter can't help but have another mental breakdown, admitting his mistakes are starting to catch up with him. Because his actions, his shadow self, his character is bringing him to a place far worse than where he originally started. Whilst at the same time, Gus's repeated death threats and use of brute force to all those in his way symbolizes the dissolving of his fake friendly facade, where we see the real Gus, a man, a corporation who would remove anyone in his way as long as it ensures his own success. Gus's fake smiley public persona is just a soft sell ad.
Chemistry isn't as simple as you think it is. You don't understand anything. Bro. I'm pretty sure that mustard gas is like close to the fucking methamphetamine, dumb fuck. I mean that, guys, if you do meth, you're doing mustard gas. You're just, how about a stupid fucking comparison? You're so dumb.
Adverts, like all these other mega corporations,
But you're
feeding
so
their
dumb.
poisonous junk into society. Like Coca-Cola's cringy fake happy songs to sell their toxic
This
syrup.
is
Or like
fucking-
Apple
I
ads
can't.
telling you to think differently whilst also working to stifle any free expression. Because Coca-Cola doesn't want happy, healthy children, just like Apple doesn't want free-thinking individuals, as none of this is good for business. And so when pressure
what
starts
is
to
this?
damage these profit margins, the smiley happy faces are quick to dissolve. With the DEA on Gus's case, a war between the cartel and infighting between Gus's workers, the true face of Gus starts to show.
Oh, no.
And with Walter realizing he's Gus's next target, Walt's shadow self grows exponentially for him to survive the whole ordeal.
you
We
say
see
it?
this through Walt poisoning a child to get Jesse back on his side, where Walt puts his innocent neighbor's life in jeopardy, and then of course Walt eventually blowing up a nursing home to destroy Gus. Walter has gone so far
I gotta
into
fix my
his
hair
descent
in a minute.
that he's at a point where he would willfully destroy the lives of untold people in a nursing home to ensure his own survival. By this point, Walt was now the man he feared, giving us a good insight to what's been forming inside of Walter, a pure monster, while at the same time Gus's final moments are marked by his two faces, his corporate tie-adjusting orderly side, and his empty, hollow and monstrous side. These details perfectly capture who these characters are beneath the surface, and even more importantly, how destructive their archetypes are in the real world. Now all of this brings us on to the final part of the show. Following the death of Gus, Walter has undoubtedly broken bad. He's no longer recognizable as the mild-mannered mule of the first season. Walter is now absorbing Gus's persona to further cement his own power, as Walter is now the kingpin of the business. which is conveyed through his body language and attitude, all while his family is tearing up in the background. But this doesn't matter anymore. The initial point of this mission is now just a distant memory, because Walt's repressed desires, his repressed beliefs and wants are now finally fulfilled. Walter is finally in control. He's made the millions, he's earned the respect and recognition for his genius, and most importantly, he's now feared. The man who sold his shares in Grey Matter is not the same Walt we see now. He even has the opportunity to sell his empire for $5 million, but this doesn't even faze him. As Walt tells Jesse, he's no longer in the meth business, he's in the empire business. Because his work, his business now puts him on the same level as those he so despised. And besides, he no longer has anything to go back to. His family and friends are absent, and his old identity no longer exists. Walter White is no longer living a repressed shadow fantasy. Walter White's identity is the shadow. That's why he can now ignore things that would have tainted his soul before, like for example the murder of the boy who witnessed the train heist. Because like Gus, Walter only cares about what's best for business no matter the consequences. Like Gus, Walt removes his employees without a second thought. Walt's ensuing murder of Mike's men bears a stark contrast to the Stanley Milgram experiments I mentioned before, where over 80% of participants would inflict near-death levels of pain if they thought it would be best for their own sake.
Guys, I'm gonna say, chat, Todd was right. Todd was right.
These people would even hear the screams, they'd hear people having heart attacks and still continue to inflict pain
Aware.
without any emotion, with their only reasoning being they'd be better off if they did it. So as Walter looks outside of his window, he's able to remove any sense of remorse as his actions are simply what's best for his own sake. But with his cancer diagnosis coming back and being reminded of his ending life, Walter starts to realize that his shadow self is only making his life worse. His loved ones hate
Next time you see a fucking train heist, you don't fucking pull up with your bike thinking you're gonna fucking make it out, man. What is that?
him. Jesse fears him, and he has no one but himself to show his ego to. So Walter chooses to finally leave his empire behind, as he realizes the true value of the connections he's abandoned in the process. After coming back to some sort of normality and trying to rekindle his abandoned social connections, Walt's actions now finally catch up with him. Jesse realizes that Walter was the one who poisoned the child, and Hank realizes Heisenberg was Walt's all along. Walter White is finally met with justice. He starts to lose everything. He becomes responsible for the death of his brother-in-law Hank. He completely loses all ties to his family and any relationship he might have had with Jesse. He loses most of his money. He's a dying fugitive on the run from the law. Everyone he once knew now despises him. He's hidden away on the lonely brinks of society in a cold, depressing cabin. Walter's final act is his only redemption as he wipes out all the men who enslaved Jesse and stole his money and the life of Hank. The show concludes with Walt dying back in the lab where it all began, with Walter's shadow being the very thing that brought him to his knees.
Ever since I entered the fabled jungle, I want to leave.
It's all these accumulating events under his Elias Heisenberg that seems to represent this catharsis from the soul-crushing, bland, and mundane life of before. It's a reaction, an explosion of repression from his underwhelming and unfelt existence. Even before his diagnosis, Walter was always sick. Sick by following a path of untrammeled rationalism, pettiness, vindictiveness, and bottom-lineism. It was only after his diagnosis that Walt realized how long he'd been sick, so his whole psyche began to produce antibodies in response to his underwhelming character. Heisenberg was just this enormous effort at self-healing. All the violence, power, or money, what does this all have in common? It was a rejection of his weak, timid, and cowardly character through a reversion to his shadow side. He had to run away from his sterile existence, and the only way he could get away from it was a return to what was untapped, becoming the infamous
What about
Heisenberg,
China, though?
a ruthless, powerful, and merciless man. Ordinary Men parallels this exact narrative, where free-thinking ordinary people in society would willfully turn into the monsters they feared, all one step at a time.
Again, I don't think a chat and nobody
We
gets
should
the
never
joke.
forget the atrocities of the 20th century, because these atrocities were a warning. We can't simply stop at remembering these actions as historical facts. We have to understand the pathways that led to these atrocities in the first place. And so it all starts with understanding the perpetrators of these evil acts. To understand how societies would suddenly transform into being these nightmarish dystopias, we have to understand the transformation of these ordinary men who become evil monsters. The message of Ordinary Men and Breaking Bad is to show that this is what human beings are like. You can think to yourself right now that you could never be a Walter White. You could never be a ruthless monster who sacrifices human life for profit. You can think that you'd never be the one inflicting untold pain onto another human being because you were told to. You could think that you'd never be the German guard committing these vile atrocities. But the statistics say otherwise. You probably would do the same, and I'm no exception either. I mean, statistically, almost all of us would. Which is why we need to understand the shadow within us. We need to understand what's repressed inside of us, the monster that's bubbling under the surface. Because only when you integrate your shadow can you destroy your character. Only then can you build a strong moral foundation that will guide you through a virtuous life. The character of Walter White is probably the best portrayal of a man who never amends his dark side. whose shadow side causes him to spiral out of control. Carl Jung, the man who coined the idea of the shadow self in the first place, used to treat his patients by paying more attention to their future development than their past actions. To do this, he tried to figure out what his patients' mental symptoms symbolized. And that's something which has been all too lost in modern political discourse, where we blame the symptoms that lead to destructive action rather than blaming the roots of these symptoms. We prescribe drugs to treat symptoms rather than integrating and understanding what's behind these symptoms in the first place. We study historical facts rather than trying to understand the causal pathways behind them. Carl Jung explained that no one is inherently good or evil. We all have a shadow we keep locked within. Under the right circumstances, the shadow may manifest itself, clouding our judgment or perhaps guiding us down that behavioral path. Walter White's shadow was a prideful, greedy, and angry one from the beginning. He had put a heavy lid on his shadow, or at least that's what he thought. It just took the right amount of pressure for him to discover, integrate, and fully embrace his shadow self. So perhaps we should start looking at our own selves and what guides our actions. And maybe we should start to attack the roots of our social problems rather than always taking temporary mitigative action.
That's kind of a stretch. I mean,
Adderall being exactly the same as meth is probably the biggest myth. Fake woke candies get told to think their big brain are not gonna get through to them, or where wokage big pharma bad.
yeah, I know. People are weird about that. I always think it's fucking absolute fucking cringe lord shit when people bring that up. Literally just cringe.